I continue to just practice. I never show up, on a call, in a meeting, in a presentation without practicing. And I use this 5-to-1 rule, that I will practice 5 times as long as the meeting is. So if the meeting's a 1-hour meeting, I'll practice for 5 hours. And it's that continuous practice and having a mindset to know that, hey, you're not perfect. No one's perfect. And, that I think is a huge part of that. So that's from a personal development. I do that all the time.
¿Alguna vez has conocido a alguien quien, viviendo en un país distinto al tuyo, ha desarrollado una carrera muy similar a la tuya? Ese es el caso que tengo con mi invitado el día de hoy, un amigo a quien conocí hace pocos años trabajando ambos para Twitter y con quien descubrí que además de compartir el mismo rol en ese entonces, cada quien en su país, compartíamos también una historia de carrera muy similar. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y he creado este espacio para conversar con algunos de los más destacados líderes de pensamiento, negocios, educación y cultura en el mundo sobre su trayectoria, lecciones y mejores prácticas y compartir así con todos nosotros su pensamiento, estrategias y recomendaciones para hacer en nuestras vidas de lo cotidiano algo extraordinario. Esto es Entre Mentores DLC. Desde hace 24 años, mi invitado hoy ha formado parte de la generación de profesionales que ha transformado la industria de marketing y publicidad en Canadá, habiendo colaborado con empresas como OMD, AOL, Yahoo y Twitter, donde trabajamos juntos por un tiempo. Acompáñenme a aprender del actual director general de Spotify en Canadá, el extraordinario Ivan Pehar. Ivan, my friend, I am so happy to have you on the show here today. Thank you for joining us.
Efra, thank you for the invite. I know it's been a long time coming. I'm super excited to be here today and just chat, see how things are going.
Actually, it's been quite a while since we last talked. I think the last time that we had a VC, you were moving out of Twitter and into Spotify.
That's right. And if I can go back to the last time we were together, it was shortly after the Raptors won the NBA championship, and you were in the Twitter office in the library holding the replica NBA Larry O.B. trophy in the office. I remember that because it showed up on my phone a couple of weeks ago.
Showed in mine too, and I have that picture. That was great. It was a cool moment. I was in Toronto. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, your trajectory, your story? What has been the path that you walked to that has brought you to this point in your life and in your career? Because you have an amazing career. So
yeah, thanks, Efra, for that. I guess I'll first answer with, as a father of 2 daughters who are both teenagers, it just keeps me on my toes in terms of platforms, what they're using. I have my own focus group of 2 teenagers to keep up to date with what's happening on platforms. And if I go back to the early days in the beginning, I think you'll hear me say something quite a bit, which is curiosity. Mm-hmm. And even growing up, and I remember the days of sitting in front of the TV and you'd have, 6 different channels. You have to get up to change the channel. And there was this curiosity of why was a specific ad appearing during the hockey game? Or why was this appearing, during a broadcast? And I think from my very early days, that curiosity peaked in terms of why? Asking a ton of questions that, took me through school, ultimately, going to school for marketing to sort of help understand the why in terms of marketing and advertising. And I'll share this quick story of how I got into the industry. And my first job working at Group M was in the accounting department. So Efra, I was probably on par with Bobby, who was the mailroom guy at the time. And I think we both had the same level of street cred. And it's really a story of determination. And it's a story of continuing to learn. And from those early days, I was always the first one that would apply for any opportunity within the agency. And HR pulled me aside and said, Ivan, are you not happy here? And I said, no, actually, the quite opposite. I am happy, but I want to continue to learn. I want to learn how different departments work, traditional media, radio, TV. This takes us back to a time, Ephra, where there was no digital media at the time. And, in the late 90s, working in media, it was a ton of traditional planning. From that, I met, someone who I really consider as my mentor, Lee Smith, who opened his own digital agency. And you have to rewind back for the two of us. We remember, the year 2000, and we remember, how the internet was a thing that was starting to get some traction, and people weren't really sure if this fad was going to last. And in those formative years, working at a very small digital media operation allowed me to stretch and really feel uncomfortable, and to feel uncomfortable to continue to learn. And then, from that, I've made lifelong friends from that first role that I had, to then quickly, move into larger agencies, working on the digital teams, running the digital teams at agencies. After about 8 years, I then pivoted to the publisher side, or as we like to say, the sales side of the business. And that's where I was able to leverage all the learning that I firsthand experienced working at a media agency, some of the pain points, to really help craft my messaging for the agencies to ultimately make their jobs a lot easier. So, fast forward to, time at AOL, time at Microsoft, my time at Yahoo, and, each one of those organizations provided something unique. And the uniqueness was, as the internet continued to drive, additional revenue, drive additional metrics, it provided me the opportunity to work for both a pure play digital company, i.e. Yahoo, where revenue was driven primarily based on, selling of ads, versus a company like Microsoft that had so many lines of business that, you were only one part of the entire ecosystem. And I remember, I'm long-winded here, but I will keep it brief, is that, I remember vividly sitting at the lunchroom table at Yahoo and thinking, what's next? And we had all heard in the digital, space, this is the year of mobile. And in 2013, I'd say a career move that I made was moving to Twitter in 2013, on the premise of it really being, at the forefront of mobile. And, seeing that experience and knowing that that was a trajectory of just digital consumption overall, it really was a great opportunity at Twitter to, not only work for a pure play, social platform that was mobile first, but allowed me to continue to grow, both from, the opening of an office of, at the time there was 4 of us, to, 45 as I left. And then now into my current role, running the Canadian business at Spotify, I had a moment at Twitter where I thought and I said, hey, what's next? And if you just think about, macro trends happening with audio and what's happening in the audio space, the growth of audio consumption overall, it was my time to, again, continue to learn and move to a role at Spotify to run the Canadian business.
So I love that story. And I was telling in the intro that, in a way, and we've talked about this in the past, like how many similarities we have in our career path, like the story of opening the Twitter office in each of our markets and being like, members or employees, like one of the 3 first employees in our respective markets, or, spending time or starting our careers on the agency side and then moving to the platforms and teaching marketing in universities, etc. There are a lot of similarities, but I have to ask, from your experience, you mentioned that spending 8 years on the agency side helped you kind of craft your narrative and understand how you were going to sell the media platforms that you've been working on for the last few years now. And I think I have the idea or the perception that, sometimes or oftentimes when a salesperson starts their career on the platform side, it's very easy for them to fully understand the platform and the technology around it, but not necessarily the full marketing aspect of it. And sometimes it's helpful to have a broader vision, and a fully integrated vision of how the platform fits into the whole marketing plan. What's your point of view on that?
So Efra, I think you're 100% bang on it. And the one part I didn't mention earlier, and you touched on it now, is that, so I've been also teaching for the last 5 years in a postgraduate program, social media planning and buying. And I think, I encourage my students as much as possible to start at an agency, which gives them, the breadth of the ability to work across multiple verticals, B, to work on multiple different brands and opportunities. And really what's most important is that cross-section between media. And I'll give you a quick example as it relates to Spotify. So, Spotify being the largest platform in the world and in Canada, the one thing we hear quite a bit is Spotify is not a channel, but it's part of our overall audio strategy. And someone who's worked in an agency can quickly define that by looking at terrestrial radio, by looking at streaming audio, by looking at podcasts, and it gives you the breadth to be able to, identify what's the right mix. And I'd say individuals that, maybe start on the publisher side don't have that view. And I think it's one thing to have gone to school and listen to some podcasts and, understand the ecosystem. When you've been intimately involved in that space, for years and years from a planning perspective, it really does help, the individual just provide a more macro view that just provides more credibility at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It's that's key. From my perspective, that's key on how to really come up with the best strategies for brands out there, and also on how to just develop your career. And I remember I had a friend, we're still good friends, we used to work together at Google, and he was very young back then, and I think this was in 2007, and it was maybe his second job ever, so he was really young back then. And I remember him telling me, like, I don't know what's going to be, what's going to happen next. What happens after Google, And I think that effect happens when people start on the platform, and especially, huge platforms like Spotify, like Google, that it doesn't necessarily gives you like the full view of the realities of work out there. So I would say, I think that people who get to start their career on the agency side, when thinking about marketing specifically, get the advantage of, being able to, as you mentioned, have a broader perspective, learn from different verticals, learn from different brands, and that enables you to have a fuller point of view.
Yeah, and Efra, if I build on that, we've talked about, publishers or sales side. I think it also holds true for brand marketers. And, I've seen, I'll give you a recent example. I have 3 of my students that graduated my class 3 years ago that, all went into the agency world and crafted their skills, and have most recently now moved over to be brand managers. And, I think it gives you so much opportunity. You'd be hard pressed to find any other industry that allows, that level of insight, accountability, opportunity, that I think it really comes down to the individual to embrace it. And yes, we all live that life. We know there's long hours at times, but I think it's so rewarding long-term. And individuals that see, or ask themselves, what's next? How is this as a stepping stone into what else I want to do, what else I want to try? Within the agency world, you have so many different roles and so many different opportunities to work on different accounts and different teams and learn different media platforms and, move between TV or planning and buying and digital, that all those opportunities are afforded. It ultimately comes down to the individual to grab it and ask for it and seek for it.
Absolutely. And that brings me to another question precisely. Where had you put attention to develop your own skills, because I know you, I get the benefit, I have the benefit of knowing you and knowing some of the great skills that you have, but how do you develop those skills in terms of communication, negotiation, business acumen, because it takes a long time, and you and I, we both teach at postgraduate programs, and I love postgraduate programs. I think that there is a disadvantage, though, sometimes when a person, an individual, will enroll in one of these programs, but has not a lot of professional experience, actual experience. So they will come out of college straight to the postgrad program. And I think that when they do that, they miss the opportunity of building other skills that only experience can help you develop. What's your point of view on that?
I think you're 100% accurate there. A lot of it goes into, having an open mindset. And, as we've been in the industry for a while, to be able to reflect, and I'll be the first one to say it, not everything I do is perfect. And that's okay. And I take those as learning opportunities. And, I've made numerous mistakes along the way, but I take that as an opportunity to get better. And just being able to self-reflect after the fact, saying, I think I missed the mark here. That allows you to fine tune in real time, how do you make that pitch better next time? How do you respond to that objection that you might get in a meeting that you weren't prepared for? Part two of that, and after I think maybe I'm just wired a certain way, is I continue to just practice. I never show up, on a call, in a meeting, in a presentation without practicing. And I use this 5-to-1 rule, that I will practice 5 times as long as the meeting is. So if the meeting's a 1-hour meeting, I'll practice for 5 hours. And there have been nights, Efra, where, my family's asleep upstairs and I'm walking around, the kitchen table, practicing the presentation, for the next day. It happens in the car as I'm driving to work. And it's that continuous practice, and having a mindset to know that, hey, you're not perfect. No one's perfect. And, that I think is a huge part of that. So that's from a personal development. I do that all the time. Something that I do on a regular basis, and this took a little bit of practice, and I had some mentorship as well, is being able, from a business acumen perspective, to read our clients' earnings reports, to listen to the earnings reports. I think it shows just a unique level of engagement. Nothing is more powerful than, when you start a meeting referencing a client's earnings, referencing a specific sentence that the CFO made. It just immediately elevates, the expectations of individuals in the room that you really are a partner. You're invested in their business. I'd also add to that, I do a ton of listening on podcasts. That has kind of been my go-to. And it might sound silly, but I'll go out for a run and I'll put on a podcast and I'll just listen to it. Mm-hmm. And it's a level of engagement and sitting on every word of that podcast, and there's, podcasts that cut across, being a better business leader through maybe HBR that I'll listen to, or, things that are happening with the industry with, most recently I've been listening to Pivot. That Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher have, or Scott Galloway's own podcast. I feel now I'm plugging his effort. I should be plugging yours. But it's those types of things where you as an individual, you need to invest the time and effort and want to learn. Because without that, no matter what you do is going to fall on deaf ears.
Absolutely. I think wanting to learn and just, maintaining the mindset of I call it the mindset of the eternal student. I think that is a skill that we get to develop.
I think we're challenged to the nth degree on that. We work in a space and industry where things are always changing. We could have another podcast just talking about the changes that Apple's making with iOS 14 and that impact, right? We could talk about, Google, the death of the cookie. So, I think whether we've realized it or not, we've signed up to work in an industry that is always changing. And it forces us, and we've seen some of the best leaders adapt to the changing landscapes and not just sit on their laurels and say, hey, if we've done it this way for the last 5 years, doesn't mean the next 5 years are going to follow that same trajectory. But ultimately, it comes down to that individual, like you said, to want to learn, to have a thirst for learning. I tell my students all the time, congratulations, you've graduated from the program, but now is when the learning really starts. And as a professor, my goal is to help empower you with the skills to get a role, to be productive, but ultimately it's on you to continue to learn and develop your own skills, with all the tools that are around us.
Absolutely. So speaking about learning, I have to ask the learnings that you've integrated into your life in the last 12, well now 13 months after the whole pandemic started, because it practically started, you were joining, or it was short after you joined Spotify and took on this new role, right?
Yeah, so Efra, I was in the office, so I've been in the Spotify Canada office for just shy of 90 days. And, as a new person who starts, you're trying to, adapt to the culture, get a sense for just office dynamics. And then we have this thrown at you. And, again, it forced me to think different, operate differently. I failed at certain things, and, we all say, fail fast and pivot and try different strategies. I'd say there's something that I've taken to heart, which is, what's most important to me is health and family. Mm-hmm. And I've prioritized that above everything else. So, here in Toronto, I'm saving on average about an hour and a half of commute time every day. I've reinvested that commute time into my family and my health. And having that as the base or the foundation of what I do makes everything a lot more adaptable, and it makes that transition into a new role a lot easier. But I think fundamentally, if you can start, we had mentioned before, this really is a blessing. And I look at the positives out of everything that's happened, and I've been home for dinner more in the last 13 months than I have in the last 13 years. And that's a positive. I spend breakfast with my family. I've gone back into running and just doing, exercise every single day because I don't have an excuse. And I say that's what has been the underpinning of everything I do. And then I pivot to the team and Spotify Canada. And something that I did very early on during the pandemic last year is, I drove about 400 kilometers over the course of the day just to stop by and say hello to the team in person. Just to stand there safely, say hello, ask them how they're doing, spend 15 minutes with each individual. And, I think that, shared with the team and, their expectations of me, to know that I'm here for them. And I might not have all the answers to everything, but just knowing that I'm here for them, anything I can do to help support them as an individual. I also encourage the team to think about themselves and spend time away from their computer. Take vacation days, even though we can't go anywhere. Disconnect from technology a bit and really focus on those things that are important to you.
I think that makes a huge difference. Just I didn't know that you were actually driving to their homes, and even if you had to stand at a distance, but just being there, showing up, that says a lot.
And I think, Efra, that comes from a place of caring for the individuals. And it's a job that we have to do every single day, and it's one that we really and thoroughly enjoy. But there's a human element of it that we all know. If you're in the office, you'd have conversations with individuals, you go for a coffee, all those things are gone. And, because our day feels so scripted being on calls, I think it takes an individual to think differently around, not what I think, but how does the other person feel? How would you, just make that person's day a little bit brighter today? And if it means I'm driving 400 kilometers, great.
I love that. Congratulations on that. I did not know that story, and it's a really good one. It's a great example of leadership. So good for you, my friend. Antes de continuar con este episodio, déjame platicarte que Entre Mentores DLC es presentado por Ricolto Café, una empresa 100% mexicana que desde hace 20 años ha llevado la experiencia del mejor café gourmet de México a miles de oficinas en este país. Hoy, Ricolto Café llega también hasta nuestros hogares a través de su nueva tienda en línea. Puedes conocerlo mejor y hacer tu pedido de cosecha especial de Veracruz, mi favorito, o de Chiapas en grano o molido en ricoltocafé.com.mx. Eso es Ricolto con K de kilo. Visita ya ricoltocafé.com.mx y lleva el mejor café de México hasta tu hogar con Ricolto Café. So, let's stick with changes. You've been part of this industry for the last 24, 25 years in Canada. And you've been part of I dare say you've been part of the generation of professionals who actually helped transform the advertising industry in Canada, in your market, from traditional to digital advertising. And you've seen a lot of changes happen. So 2 questions on that. Number 1, what has been the main factor that has helped you succeed in leading your clients in this transformation process? That's one thing. And the other, that's one question. And the second question is, what has really changed you in the last 24, 25 years from starting on traditional advertising, now being the head of Spotify in Canada?
Yeah, so Efra, to answer the first question, is that everything, even back to like one of the first things I ever did, a digital campaign, was always rooted in data. And there's, something to be said about your own personal opinion on where you think a client or an advertiser should spend money, which is, completely biased. Again, it could be the right answer, but, always having information rooted in data to support whatever the recommendation, whatever your theory is. When it's rooted in data, it's really difficult to pull apart. Now, again, someone can disagree with you, but having data that supports your recommendation, that supports what you're trying to do, I think is at the top of that list. The other part is, treating your client's money or campaign as if it's your own money. And if this was your business, how would you best optimize every dollar you spend, knowing that if the client is successful in what they're doing, then as a byproduct of that, you'll also be successful. The client will run more campaigns, which keeps your business going. And it really is that circle of life that, if you take everything you do with the lens of, if this was my money I was spending, how would you spend it efficiently and ultimately drive, the client's business or the advertiser's business. On the other part, when you mentioned how have I changed as an individual, I think what hasn't changed is that curiosity of what's next. When we think about the early days of running banner ads, I was always asked, well, what else can we do? What's next here? And to continue to think, along that lens of, as much as things have changed, what hasn't changed or what the constant is of that curiosity and that desire to continue to ask a ton of questions of, why do we do it this way? Or have you thought about this? That just, brings a different lens to the conversation. But, the underpinning of that really is the curiosity. And I go back to when we first started, Efra, that curiosity that I've had as a kid stays with me true to this day. I was that child that would, break apart the radio, but wouldn't be able to put it back together. But it was that curiosity of like, how does this thing work? So I'd say that really, rooted in data, spending your client's budget as if it was your own dollar, and then driving that curiosity that has to be there, right? You call it being a lifelong learner. And if that's not part of your DNA, then, an industry like this that's ever evolving and changing might not be the right one for everyone.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let me ask you one thing. With all the things that you've done along the years, with all the peaks and the valleys, all the ups and downs, if Doc Brown were to show with his DeLorean at your door, remember the DeLorean? So if Doc Brown were to show up and give you the keys to the DeLorean, and you could travel in time to the future or to the past, to what point in time would you travel to, and to do what?
Oh, wow, Efra, that's a great question. I would probably travel to the future. And I would travel to the future. We all know what's happened in the past. And, traveling to the future, to the unknown, is what I'd really love to know. So, if we were to travel 100 years from now, how would the world be? How would this industry that we're in, this industry that I've been in for the last 25 years, how will that evolve and change? And I think it's that unknown of the future that excites me about the future. A ton of stuff, when we look back, we know the results, and we take a lot of learnings of what happened in the past. But really what excites me is the future, and not knowing what the future is, but allowing us as individuals to craft what the next 25 years of this industry looks like. I think that for me is like, how do I punch in 100 years from now to look back and be like, wow, look at this, being, one of the early adopters in this, digital space in Canada, to be able to look back and be like, wow, look at what we've done. Look at how far this industry has gotten over the last 100 years.
That's good. Now, suppose that you chose to go to the past, to visit your younger self. I don't know, maybe you go to visit 18-year-old Ivan or 20-year-old Ivan, and you were able to bring yourself, your past self, a book that that if you had read it sooner in your life, that would have made a big difference in your life. What book or what podcast or what type of content would you bring your past self?
Oh gosh, so Efra, there'd be too many books to even cite. I don't think I could bring one book back, but I'd say, if there's one topic or theme that I would bring back to an 18-year-old Ivan, first of all, let's say, hey, give up that soccer career. It's not going to happen. So you can start with that. But the other part is, it's okay to fail. And in the early days when I started my career, to say I was a perfectionist wouldn't even represent, what I was trying to do. And, I'd say that during that time, in the early days when I started my career, everything had to be A+ done. And with that, you can never delegate. You were never on time because you were spending too much time trying to make everything a Picasso or making everything a masterpiece. And I'd say the ability to balance time and, when you put in that extra 2 hours of work to get that incremental 1% increase on something you're doing, the ROI doesn't necessarily make sense. So I'd say bringing back that time management, that ability to fail, learn from that as an experience, and just not take everything to heart, that it has to be the best thing that's ever been written.
Love that. That's a great learning. That's a great lesson.
It's something, Efra, I try and share with my daughters as well all the time. That give it your best, but understand that you have 24 hours in a day. And how do you maximize everything you're capable of doing in that day versus just focusing solely on one individual thing that you then don't get to the other 10 things you needed to do that day.
Exactly. That's good. So when you're talking to your daughters and you're giving them some advice, so you tell them, okay, so just be mindful of how you manage your time and how much time you spend on X and Y tasks. How are you helping them, or what type of advice are you sharing with them precisely not to fall on the pit of perfectionism?
Yeah, so it really starts in the morning. And, you're going to listen to this and be like, wow, Ivan runs such a regimented operation. Is that, in the morning, our time in the morning is really setting the foundation for what are we going to do that day? What do you have to do at school? What extracurricular activities do you have? And ensure that we have enough time to do everything. And it really starts, scripting the day in the morning to identify what has to get done before, this time, before you go to sleep, and just setting the expectations up front. If you want to go and spend 2 hours on a social platform, well, hey, that's great, but just know we got to get all of this stuff done. And it's trying to instill that rigor around time management, understanding there's time to, wind down a little bit, have your own personal time, but ensuring that you still know what has to get accomplished that day, and ensuring that it gets done by X certain time, and driving that accountability. If you want to go out and skateboard for 3 hours, well, that's great, but just remember we have all the stuff we still have to do today. Mm-hmm. And just knowing that, it drives the accountability to each one of my daughters.
That's good. I think that accountability is one of the best lessons that we can teach our kids or share with our kids, because unfortunately the world is full of people who don't hold themselves accountable, and teaching our children to really be accountable for what they're responsible for, that I think that's very important. Now, you've just mentioned how you start your morning and how you advise your daughters to manage their time. Now, that brings me to a question that I ask all of our guests. It has to do with habits and routines. I am convinced, Ivan, that for someone to be as productive as you are, you have to come up, or you have to integrate and build certain routines in your life, and integrate a certain set of habits into your life that will help you be as productive as you are. So what habits and what routines have you integrated into your life that are helping you today be as productive as you are?
Yeah, what I've started over the last few years is, when I start the day, many people will reach for their phone to see what notifications they have. I really start the day, and that first 10 minutes is for myself. And it's that time to, I wouldn't necessarily call it meditation, it's just quiet time. And I sit there and I reflect on just being alive, and being thankful for what's ahead of the day. And I really take that time for myself. My daughters and my wife are still sleeping, in the house. So I just sort of go down quietly, no technology around me, and I just sort of reflect, for about 10 minutes in the morning. And, with that, then starts the routine of, breakfast, getting everyone up, checking in to see how everyone's doing today, being thankful that we're here today and alive today. But other routines that I've started to do, I mean, COVID has really accelerated, these routines, is I'll block time off in my calendar, and it's personal time. And it's time that, in the springtime, I'll go out for a run for 5K to just, step away from what's happening in the world. Periodically, you'll see me, like, I'll turn off my notifications on my phone for hours at a time. I'll turn off Slack and Hangouts, so there's no distractions as well. And then, there's times where it's just head down and I need to get something done. We've all been in the trap of, as soon as you start responding to an email, another one comes, or you're getting pings on Hangouts. And really to be the owner of my calendar is what I've started to do. And it's definitely made me more productive. We could all, argue I'm someone who loves to be inbox zero. And that is extremely difficult. When I come back from vacation, I see 500 emails. I don't know where to start. But I think it's taking back ownership of your calendar, of your schedule, and really prioritizing what's urgent and what's important. And to be able to ruthlessly prioritize how it is that you tackle your day.
That's great. You know that I once recorded an episode with another podcaster who has an auto reply on his email. So whenever you send him an email, you'll get an auto response that says, "I'm sorry I'm not able to respond to you as fast. I only check my email twice a day. At this time, in the morning, at 9 a.m. in the morning, I don't remember the exact time, but at 9 a.m. in the morning or at 3 p.m. in the afternoon." And that's the only time that I spend on email. So with that, you know that if you wrote him at, say, 10 a.m., you're not going to get a response before that evening or maybe the day after. And that's actually when I saw that, that's a good idea. I think at least you set the expectations for people to, for when you're going to reply to people.
Yeah, Efraín, do you think, is that something that you would be willing to try?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting. Again, like you said, it's managing the expectation of the other individual. Mm-hmm. And it allows you to have all that time, head down, prioritize what's next, what do you need to get done, and knowing that you're not going to disappoint the other person because you've set that expectation.
Exactly. That's what I like about that. Because I often use very specific times to check out email, because I used to check it all of the time, and I used to have my phone in my hand all of the time, and both my daughter and my wife brought that to my attention. So I've been working hard. I cannot say in any way that I have been successful at letting go, but there are some days where I'm able to I'm going to focus on checking email and social at these times of the day, so that I can focus on work or focus on other stuff. So
I think, Efraín, we're byproducts of real-time FOMO, right? There's an expectation, especially on the digital side, where you're up to date on everything that's happening, every trend that's happening, every piece of information that might be breaking. And I don't know if we've done it to ourselves or not, but I do feel that same sense of, I just need to know everything about everything that's happening.
So, time runs out really fast when you're having fun. And I cannot believe that we are almost at an hour. It's going to be an hour since we started talking. And before I ask you the last two questions, where can people who are listening to us, where can they connect with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. And I guess, Efra, a sign of being an early adopter is, when your email is your first name, last name, or your Twitter handle is your first name, last name.
Exactly.
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Ivan Pehar, head of Spotify Canada. You can find me on Twitter at Ivan Pehar, and I will say yes to every connection. I look forward to building the network, making new friends, exchanging thoughts with individuals, and just continuing to grow this ecosystem that you and I are both fortunate to be a part of.
Thank you for that. Here are the last two questions. What has been the worst advice that you've listened to in your life? That advice, because a lot of people gives us advice, and most of the time it's they come from a good heart, but they're not necessarily the right ones. And so, what has been the worst advice that you've listened to that got you thinking, like, what the hell was I thinking?
So, Efra, as I was starting in this career, in this industry, I remember a good family friend said to me, let me review your resume. And this is pre-LinkedIn days. Mm-hmm. And basically had me, spending the better part of a week and a half revising my resume this way, that way, changing this, changing the font, double spacing. And, the story here is that I actually ended up getting the job at Group M, and I sent my original resume. So with all these different fonts and changes and, changing all these different elements, it was my original resume that I had that actually helped me get a job. And the one question I get asked all the time as a result of this experience through my students is like, hey, can you look at my resume? And my response is, there is no magical font that's going to make your resume appear at the top of the list. Everyone's going to look at your LinkedIn profile, use that as your resume, spend time on that versus, a traditional resume that, most people probably won't even see. So I'd say, from that learning experience, I then continue to share that with my students. Like, don't spend tons of time editing. Make sure it's, it fits the script, it's part of the mold, your information is there, but for the most part, focused on your LinkedIn profile and ensure that that's up, is A+, does a great representation of who you are as an individual versus spending hours trying to reformat a resume.
Love that. So my friend, the whole premise, and I think I've shared this with you in the past, but the whole premise of this show is to learn from leaders like yourself how they turn the daily stuff or the day-to-day stuff in their lives into something extraordinary. So how does Ivan Pehar transforms the day-to-day into something extraordinary?
Well, I'd say, Efra, it starts with just being thankful for the opportunity that I have in this industry. Others might have, long-winded answers and ideology and all that. I go back to, 1999 and being thankful for the opportunity that I moved into the digital space to be part of this growing ecosystem. And, I'd say on a weekly basis, I reflect back to those early days of when I started in this industry. And, I take that as something that I'm really proud of and grateful for every single day that I get to be a part of this space and continue to help shape the next evolution of media and digital media professionals through the work I do at Humber College. So, some might say it's a little bit of giving back to the community. I think it's, helping to provide the 20 plus years of experience I have for the next generation of individuals that we're going to pass the torch pretty soon to be the ones that'll be the next brand managers. They'll be the next, country managers of platforms, and just instilling and sharing, your own experiences that you have that you can't read on a blog, you can't listen to on a podcast, that only you can share firsthand experiences.
Love that. Thank you very much for sharing that. And thank you again for spending this time with us and sharing all your insights and experience. I want to acknowledge you for the amazing work that you're doing. I think that it's incredible when you have the opportunity to work with someone as professional, as capable and experienced as you. It's an amazing opportunity. So I'm thankful for that too. Thank you, my friend, for being here, and talk soon.
Thanks, Efra. Have a great rest of the day.
Y muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes por escuchar este episodio de Entre Mentores DLC. Recuerden, este es un programa semanal, así es que si no lo han hecho ya, suscríbanse al mismo y compartan este y todos los episodios de Entre Mentores DLC, porque estoy seguro que entre sus amigos, familiares y colegas hay muchísimas personas que se pueden beneficiar muchísimo de las lecciones y consejos que grandes mentores como Ivan hoy nos están compartiendo. Muchas gracias como siempre a Ricolto Café, el mejor café de México, por compartir esta aventura de vida todos los días. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y esto es Entre Mentores DLC. Hasta la próxima.